Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to learn about getting it right the first time, how to make sure that our Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP is correctly configured and well aligned with best practices and ready to serve whatever workload we put on it. And today, I am joined by my colleague and friend, Robert Bell. Robert, how are you tonight?
I'm great. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. So during this session, you're more than welcome to ask your questions in the Q&A thread. There are chat responders available in this session, so please shoot your questions away, and we'll make sure they get an answer. At the end, we will have a Q&A session as well. So if some questions are unanswered, we'll be very happy to answer them at the end of the session as well. And without further ado, I'm handing it over to Robert. So, Robert, how do we get it right the first time?
Well, that's a great question. Sometimes we have to get it right the first time, the second time, because a lot of the times when you get started, you don't really know what it is you're planning or what it is you're doing. You learn from mistakes. But I think this session is really about at least the right approach, taking the right approach when starting off. From the planning stage through deployment and through ongoing operation. So as Danny mentioned, we're going to be talking about Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and BlueXP Workload Factory. And these are two separate services that really go well together when it comes to following best practices on AWS. So, and I do want to mention that questions are welcome throughout the session. We have a team here that is going to be watching the chat, and Q&A, and any questions that come up, I gave them permission to interrupt me, and we can talk about things because I think it is important sometimes to address things at the right time rather than wait till the end. But as
So
Danny
if you have a
said,
question, I will tell Robert to stop. I'm monitoring the questions, and if there's a very good question, then I'll make sure to bring it to your attention, Robert.
yeah, we're also going to get you to participate a bit because we have some questions that we want you to answer. So we'll do that with a poll. So occasionally you'll have a poll question that will come up, and we do want to hear your opinion about these things because I think it's really a discussion here, and we want to customize what we're showing here to your specific situation, your specific strategy and plans. So I'll move on to the first slide, which is really, I just want to start off with this slide that might look a little bit overwhelming. But this is really to show what FSx for ONTAP is. It's an AWS service that is an intelligent storage service for workloads. And it's really one of the storage services in AWS, but it has a lot more to it because it's really based on the ONTAP technology that was developed by NetApp. And that includes a wide range of capabilities across different types of areas that really make it a set of building blocks for doing many different types of things. So because of this variety of features, it really lets you mold this service to a specific use case and a specific need. So while this might look overwhelming, I'm sure that a lot of you who have used or encountered FSx for ONTAP are familiar with these, and I will touch some of these. I won't go over all of these in detail, but I will touch some of these in the demonstration that I'm going to show. So what I want to do is tie this sort of like list of features into something more practical. And what I want to talk about is the AWS well-architected framework. But before I go into that, I do want to get your answers to our first poll question. So what we would like to know here is how familiar you are with the AWS well-architected framework. Have you heard of it before? Are you familiar with it? Does it mean anything to you? So this is something that we would really like you, if you can, just click on the answer that is most applicable to you. I've heard that it is really something that is very, very well known. I don't know, Danny, do you get the same kind of feeling?
Yeah, so with my experience, I've been working with AWS for more than a decade now, almost a decade and a half, since I think I started in 2011 to work with AWS. I don't remember exactly when it was introduced, but I do remember that it was introduced as a model of how to build your application on AWS, how to make sure that it is built correctly according to best practices. It's sort of they try to build it as a very holistic model to make sure that it really covers all aspects of all different technologies because many people do different things on AWS.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's check the
By the way, Leah, do we have any answers?
yeah,
Oh,
whereabouts. Oh,
and thank you. I
okay.
see we have
Interesting.
got some responses. And I see we have a mixed audience, Robert. So some people, I'm glad to say that the minority of the attendees are not familiar with it. Most have at least heard of it, and coming in second place, many are well familiar with it. So I think in that case, considering the results, Robert, I think it would be appropriate if we could maybe give it a quick review.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I will explain sort of where it came from and what it is in practice. So, obviously, this is something that, as Danny mentioned, it's been around for a while. I think it has evolved from the fact that AWS has evolved dramatically since it was launched. And then sort of like there's I guess a process of learning how to use the different services in different ways, tying the services to the business needs. And through working directly with the customers and accompanying them in their journey, their cloud journey, there were conclusions that came up, and these best practices were formed just based on things that worked, things that didn't work, in order to sort of give the proper guidelines around specific areas. So in essence, the well-architected framework is really just a very extensive and comprehensive set of best practices that help anyone who is deploying workloads on AWS optimize them specifically for these areas that are listed here around pillars that you can see, which are security, operational efficiency, reliability, performance, sustainability, and cost efficiency. So these are the different areas. So each one kind of like this is to make it, I think, easier to consume. Each one is really focused on specific needs related to that area. But overall, the the key is that this following these best practices really optimizes these areas, which are important for every organization. So if we take this whole huge list of best practices and maybe try and turn that into something more digestible, I would say that it could be divided into two different groups. So one group would be the performance efficiency, sustainability, and cost optimization. Each one has their own sort of specific purpose, but overall, they all refer to the fact that it is necessary from the very beginning to choose the right resources and configure them in an optimal way so that there will be the best balance between cost and performance. So it's pretty straightforward, this idea, but it is broken down to many different things that can be done. So getting the best performance for the lowest cost, that's really the essence of this, by selecting the right building blocks or the right infrastructure and configuring them in an optimal way for the best cost performance. And then the second group would be the operational excellence, security, and reliability, which are really all around keeping the data available and protected. So on the one hand, the data has to be the information that is in the cloud has to be accessible. If whoever needs to access it, whether it's people or applications, it needs to be accessible when it's needed, and it also needs to be protected so that it cannot be harmed by malicious attacks or also by unplanned outages or natural disasters. All of these things really need to be applied. And there's kind of like a balance between these two groups because each one is equally important and needs to be addressed really from the very first stages. So if we look at this concept of choosing the infrastructure, configuring it properly, and then applying these mechanisms to keep it automatically protected, we could say that this kind of like divides into two different areas that we need to think about. One of them being the resources, the actual resources of infrastructure and their capabilities. So there is a infrastructure resource and what it can do. That's one thing, kind of like the building blocks themselves. And then on the other hand, there is the workflows and processes. So it's how we use these resources, the processes that take place when these resources are enabled and activated. If we sort of just start from the do-it-yourself approach, which is, I think, what was done, which means I go to AWS, I choose the relevant services, and I assemble them myself is in a DIY approach. What that would mean usually is that from the resources and point of view, there will be multiple services or multiple tools that I would use, some of them being possibly AWS services, but maybe third-party services, and building my own, constructing my own architecture out of these basic building blocks. And then for the processes and workflows, that would require, first of all, a lot of knowledge. So having the services, knowing the services would require a lot of people, a lot of resources, but also expertise for these resources, and also plenty of time. So this is an approach that can work if there is an abundance of people and they have plenty of time, which, as we know, is usually not the case. What we're hearing more and more from customers that we talk to is that the teams that used to manage the infrastructure in the data center, these teams are now in the cloud, smaller teams, and they're expected to do a lot more in a lot less time. So what we're going to talk about in this session is the other alternative, which is using existing services, leveraging a service that already is designed to provide the well-architected building blocks, or in other words, the resources that have the necessary capabilities for complying to these best practices, and a second service, which is a service that provides the well-architected orchestration, or in other words, the one that automates the processes and workflows, putting them together. So this will not only require less people and less time, but also won't require the company who is building the architecture to actually have expertise in all the different services. So this brings us back to the beginning where we said that the FSx for ONTAP is in fact providing the building blocks for well-architected workloads. And now we're introducing a second service called Workload Factory. It's a service provided by NetApp, which is designed to do well-architected orchestration. So if we take the capabilities of FSx for ONTAP, which cover features for optimal cost performance, features that allow different levels of security and data protection, and features for accessibility to the data and mobility features, we've got a storage service that really covers the building blocks for building well-architected infrastructures. But on the other hand, we also need the tools which will save time and expertise necessary. So that would include planning tools for designing the architecture, deployment tools for actually going through the process of implementing and configuring the FSx for ONTAP and its specific features, and also operational tools so that on an ongoing basis we can ensure that everything is working properly. So to illustrate that and to see it in action, I want to show you a very simplified demo of a simplified customer case. And this is based on something that many of our customers have actually been through this process. It's often a lot more complicated. So I'm just showing sort of a specific use case here, but obviously this is something that um, in reality can include many more different layers and different types of workloads. And that's something that obviously can be addressed. So what we want to talk about here is a software company that has information on premises, which is going to stay on premises. It's not necessarily going to be migrated to the cloud, but the data is needed on the cloud because in the cloud there are different applications, there are different users, and this company really wants to create kind of like a data set, a shared data set on AWS that will serve multiple departments within the company. And this is something which you see is very, very common. So a lot of the information will be just built on AWS, but some of it needs to come from the on-premises. And the company wants to do it in a very uh, consistent way, consistent with the company's policies. So I want to show you a demonstration of how this company would do it, but let's ask you another question just to keep you active and alert. What we want to know here is for your organization, what is the top priority when you're running a workload on AWS? So it's a difficult choice because there's probably more than one, but we just want to see like what is the top priority? Is it cost efficiency? Is it performance, high availability, or data protection and security? What would be sort of like the showstopper for you when it comes to deploying workloads on AWS? Uh,
Interesting question, because when you think about it, although there's a single choice, sometimes there are somewhat conflicting priorities. Sometimes the priorities work together. For example, your application might need to be highly available, but the application serves a bank or an insurance company that is highly regulated and has lots of PII involved. So it's not high availability, but it's also data protection and security are equally high. So very interesting question, or very interesting to see the poll results when they're ready. And I do believe we have the results.
do we have a winner? Yes, we do have
Yes,
it.
we have a winner,
No,
and
no,
I
it's a
think we have a
tie.
tie. Yeah, an interesting tie there. So first of all, we all, surprisingly enough, we all want to operate in the cloud, but we also want to operate cost effectively, i.e., that I think we've all seen it that we're expecting to get our detailed billing report, but we get a phone book. It's that big. So cost efficiency, definitely a priority, and also high availability. We put our applications out there in the cloud and want them to be available, which is whether we're mandated to do it by our SLAs, or whether we just want our customers to be able to approach the service. Because if the service is down, that means money off our bottom line as well. So you can connect it to cost efficiency in a way. And high performance, I see also quite that is the second place, which also makes sense. We all want high performance. Latency is something that is very important to users, but there are specific verticals which, for them, high performance is critical as well. And I am a bit surprised to see that data protection and security is the third place. But I think I do believe that if this poll was not a single choice, we would have seen a lot more data protection and security. What do you think, Robert?
I totally agree. And I do think it really depends on both the nature of the organization, how critical each thing is, and also I think that it depends on how long you've been on AWS. And often you start off with a certain idea, but then the priorities can change over time depending on what's happening. Obviously, if the costs are really getting too high, that can be it's just something that can really damage the business. Same as with availability. So I think cost and high availability are really common for everyone because that's something that can be a complete showstopper. As for the data protection And performance, that really depends on the nature of the workload. For some workloads, it's more important. Some workloads, it's maybe not a critical issue. So thank you all for answering. And this is actually, it's helpful for us to understand this. And I do agree with Danny that actually all of these things are important. It's not that anything is not important. It's really just understanding um, what the mindset would be when you start
By the
planning.
way, Robert, somebody took advantage of the Q&A, one of the attendees, to say that C and D would have been their choice, which I think was high availability and data protection, which makes
Yes.
perfect sense. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, there should have been a fifth answer, which is all of the above, and then that would have been 100%. Anyway, it wasn't a quiz. It was really just to kind of get a feel of where you are right now with this. So what I want to do now is I want to sort of walk through what this customer who is now has to deploy um, the workloads on AWS, where some of these workloads need to be replicated from on-premises. Um, in the first stage, and we're going to go through the planning, provisioning, and operating stages. So in the first place, which is the planning, we have to consider the requirements. And this, as we saw in the answers, this might be different depending on the type of workload, the use case, the priorities of the organization, and maybe even of the departments who are going to be using this workload within the organization. But if we take this example, and this is really just to illustrate how the building blocks and the orchestration can really work together in harmony to help you get it right the first time. If we consider requirements where the performance and resilience that will be in the cloud need to be similar to what is on premises, because this data has the same data security requirements, protection requirements, and performance requirements. This is something sort of the data needs to be replicated, but also the SLA needs to be replicated too. Obviously, the cost we saw is one of the main issues. So you can't just randomly choose a service. If you want to use FSx for ONTAP as the storage, you need to know that it's either the same or lower cost than any alternative. And the planning time, I think, is critical to be minimal. You can't just spend too much time planning because really that can postpone the whole project. So in order to meet these, what we're going to do is we're going to show a demonstration on Workload Factory. So again, Workload Factory is a service. It's a free service that anyone can use. It's free to sign up. And what it has is it has a set of tools within it for planning, provisioning, and operating workloads. Currently, it's all around FSx for ONTAP. This is the current support. So it includes the necessary tools for FSx for ONTAP. So I'm going to show you a demo, and really we're not going to go over everything, but really just to sort of follow this customer story, which would start off by choosing in this section where you see explore savings, choosing the alternative. We want to see that the costs are relatively low compared to other services. And we're talking about a customer who wants to deploy a file system which is the on-premises file system to move the data to AWS or replicate it to AWS. The file system is serving applications, so it's typically would be Linux access. So the alternative storage service here would, in this case, for comparison, would be EFS, which supports the NFS format. So if we choose that, we go to the planning screen. And again, it would depend on the use case you might choose to compare to EBS or FSx for Windows, depending on what the workload is. And then the first thing we do here is we choose the use case. Now, this I think is very important because this is something that's sometimes done as an afterthought. When you start building on AWS, you're building the architecture really based on the components. But then, depending on the use case, you might find certain things that need to be changed. So when we talk about getting it right the first time, it means choosing from the start in the planning stage, choosing the right use case. So there's a lot of different use cases here. And
I think
as we,
also one thing to remember here that another common mistake is that people start building their infrastructure for the POC, and then when they revert to production, they're either not starting again from scratch the right way, or alternatively try to find ways to overcome issues because the environment was not built for the specific use case, whether it's archiving or from archiving to high performance. Either you find yourself dealing with latency bottlenecks on the one hand, or you have an open provisioned environment and you get a massive DBR.
yeah, that's absolutely correct. So if we choose the specific use case that we need, in this case, it will be departmental file shares. What Workload Factory will do, it will build the configuration, the planned configuration of FSX for ONTAP based on this use case. Obviously, there's certain things you have to change, but you can immediately you can see the comparison, and here we can see in this example that from a cost perspective, it makes sense that the costs of FS in this specific workload and use case, FSX for ONTAP is the lower cost option. You would fill in the required capacity and the throughput necessary, and then you get a detailed description of what the configuration would be. And this is something that you can review, but also you can look at the calculations themselves. And I think this is probably the key here, because you're not just going to trust a planning tool without actually knowing what it's done. But by looking at the calculation, which is something that's downloadable, and you can take this and view it offline with the team. So if the decision makers really want to know what happened, how this calculation was done, all of the information is provided here, which really is a breakdown of how the configuration is, why these specific parameters were chosen, what they would mean. And all of this is really also translated into the cost. So you can see exactly how much the cost breakdown would be for each one of these components. If necessary, it can be changed. And this calculation or plan can be saved. It can be saved, or it can be used as a template for deploying this specific FSX for ONTAP system. So you're getting a planning tool which really you can use it within a couple of minutes, review all of the details, and then use that to deploy the system itself. So this was just an example of how you would use that. And if we move forward to summarize this planning section, we've got FSX for ONTAP with the well-architected building blocks, which would in this case be the storage efficiencies, something that is built into FSX for ONTAP. It has the ability to provide more capacity for less costs. And then, therefore, when you compare that to other services, you can get cost savings there. The important thing is that these storage efficiencies don't impact performance. So you get the same performance or high performance for less cost. Another thing is the multiple use cases, that by configuring it correctly, you can actually meet very different requirements. And knowing that in advance is the key to getting it right. And if we look at what Workload Factory does as a complementary orchestration tool, it allows the simple and fast planning. So you don't have to be an expert at all the different aspects of the product or how to configure it. It's really just a matter of following the planning sheet and just filling in the details, and then getting a detailed configuration explanation, which can be reviewed and analyzed before making the decision to deploy the system. So you get a quick plan, saving time, but also customized to the specific use case. And as for the use cases, it's like I said, it's not, it could be different. There were different requirements. If it's an archive system, you don't necessarily need high performance and you're more concerned about lower costs. Engineering data maybe would need higher performance. Databases also have their own specific requirements for latency. Shared file system has its requirements for accessibility. So each one of these will have a different set of requirements, but you don't need to know that. You just need to know which use case you're trying to apply. So I think this is something that really helps from the planning stage to plan it right the first time, which is obviously the most important step for when you move forward. So now we can move on to the provisioning. So assuming that the planning went well, we have the plan, we have a template for actually deploying, which we can apply, and you get the FSX for ONTAP system up and running. Now, what this specific customer wants to do is to replicate on-premises volumes to AWS. Now, it's not all of the data. There's a lot of data on-premises, but only a specific volume needs to be replicated. And in addition to that, there needs to be another volume for a separate department, which in the same system, the same FSX for ONTAP system needs to be applied. And all of this repository of files needs to be accessible both from Windows and from Linux. And that's because there will be applications or application servers running that we need to access the data, and also users that will want to access the data. Instead of having two copies of all of the data in different file formats, we want it to be able to access both. So let's go back to Workload Factory again. This is the opening screen of Workload Factory. I'm going to show really a simplified demonstration of how this would work. So the first stage would be to go to the storage section in Workload Factory and choose the on-premises tab. Here, the system on-premises has been discovered already. So there's obviously some configuration you need to do on the network to allow access to discover the on-premises system. But then once we click on that, view that, we see several different volumes. So we want to replicate one specific volume out of this. So by clicking replicate on Workload Factory, the orchestration tool, what it does is it opens a deployment wizard, or a replication wizard in this case, where after choosing the system, the FSX system, we get certain things that we have to fill in. It's really not a lot of different choices because the replication itself is really done all behind the scenes by Workload Factory. But we do choose things like the use case, the tiering policy that is for storage efficiencies. So the things that are necessary for the best applying to the best practices when making replication are all in here. And once we created, we click on create, the replication is created. You can see the details here. And as I mentioned, it's not just one simple action. There are a lot of different things that are happening in the background that Workload Factory does that save you the time of doing it yourself. And then what we can do in this case is to create we've created the replication. So we have one volume which is replicated from on-premises. So now let's add another volume for a separate volume for the department. Let's do it for the finance department. And here we're creating another volume where we can decide how much capacity to put. We'll make volume auto grow so that when there's more data put on the volume, it will automatically grow itself. And then each one of these things really is one part of a certain part of the well-architected framework best practices. Efficiency, protection, all of these things are built into the deployment wizard. So this is something that by going through this and following the instructions and filling in the right information, we can create and provision something which is already set to meet the requirements for protection, security, cost efficiency, operational efficiency. All of those things are built in. We can create it directly from Workload Factory, but in some cases, some companies already have a system for provisioning environments, which is with APIs or with Terraform. So if we take Terraform, for example, what has happened here is that every configuration that we made is applied here on this script, which is designed specifically for deploying this volume. So everything you configure appears here. You can compare the different configurations to the Terraform script. And then once you you want that, you copy that, and you can apply that on Terraform. Or alternatively, you just do it directly from Workload Factory, and it deploys this volume in the system. So that's the provisioning phase. Let's move on to summarize the deployment stage. So what we saw from FSx for ONTAP, which provides the well-architected building blocks, we saw things like multi-protocol access. This is a very important thing, that you can create volumes that you can access from different types of systems for different types of purposes, rather than just multiplying, replicating the volume. And it provides data mobility support. So these are two things that are often very, very challenging. How do you access system from different access storage from different operating systems, and how do you move storage from on-premises to AWS without actually ruining anything? So this is all built into the system, something that you don't need to worry about. You don't need to be an expert on that. And from the Workload Factory, the well-architected orchestration side, we've got migration wizards. So these wizards have the best practices built into them. So everything that you need to do when deploying appears as a field within the wizard. So you're choosing based on your specific requirements, but you're choosing the things that will make the deployment optimal for meeting security, performance, and cost requirements. This is something that really saves a lot of time, because if you deploy it without that, then changing that, reconfiguring, and adding that on later is much more difficult. The deployment can be done directly, which means a lot of these processes, which would require a lot of different commands normally, are all done automatically in the background, but also providing everything that can be deployed by Workload Factory as infrastructure as code snippet. So this is something that really can save time, but also fit your specific way of deploying. And when it comes to data mobility, this is something that's really unique, something that is unique for FSx for ONTAP. The fact that it can mirror data, that means have taking the data and just replicating it identically in a different area. It could be from on-premises to AWS, or from one region to another. You can clone data. That means create an identical independent copy. And you can do caching, which means when you have the metadata in a different place, where you can start using a data set, but without copying all of the data. So these give a lot of flexibility when it comes to accessing data from different places and moving data around. It's something that's really just built into the architecture of FSx for ONTAP. So now, before we move on to the final section, which is the operations, the ongoing operations, we want to ask another question. So Liat, can we have the third poll? Yes. Okay, now this is an interesting question. After you've deployed something, or you have your installed base, you have your systems up and running, how do you know if your infrastructure is not optimized, if it's suboptimal, if there's something that was not optimal, or something that has drifted away from the optimal situation? How do you know it? Is it because you're seeing that the costs are too high? Is it that the users start complaining that things are not working like they were? Are there situations where you don't even know if it's optimized or not? Or is the infrastructure continuously monitored, so anything that drifts away from the optimal configuration is shown through a dashboard? I think there will I'm guessing that there'll be a variety here of answers. Danny, what do you think? From your experience as a user as well, what would you say?
Well, so it's a very good question. So most people, first of all, what from my experiences, first of all, people try to monitor their infrastructure with different tools. That's very common. And others do dedicated session with third-party consultants who would go over and review. I know that AWS, for the prime customers, offer a service where a solutions architect or a technical account manager would come, and they have a very big and long questionnaire and will basically question you: do you back up? Do you have copies in different regions, for example? Do you have Lambda functions that turn off your your unneeded resources, etc.? this huge questionnaire, and at the end, they can tell you where you have room for improved, etc. And it's called a well-architected session. So that's what I know. Let's see what.
Oh, interesting. This
Yeah.
is
So
interesting.
as we said, one of the pain points here is monthly costs, which are could be unexpectedly high, as that's always an indication that something is not working well. That maybe we have lots of dormant infrastructure that is not used, um, users reporting issues, that etc. Um, what else?
Yeah, well, I think this is actually something this is what I would expect, and this is just really based on many discussions with our customers. This is often the case that, it's the least answers we're on. I'm not sure if it's optimized. Obviously, sometimes you don't know, but usually you find out some way. It could be through the costs, or it could be through users saying that the performance is not good enough. Because yeah, people are not going to sit back when they're not getting the kind of SLA or the kind of service that they're expecting. So that's often the case, and I think that's really what we want to address here in this last section. So moving on to the final stage, which is everything's been deployed, it's up and running. The company wants, on an ongoing basis, knows that, okay, they might have done it right the first time, but you want to make sure that it stays right on an ongoing basis. And the reason for that is that things are dynamic. Data is added, users are, sometimes there's more users, there's less usage. Things change in the environment. Sometimes a new feature comes out. AWS comes out with a new feature, which can actually optimize the infrastructure, but it wasn't applied when the system was deployed. So all of these things are something that really need to be continuously optimized. And this is what the customer wants. They want to first of all, at every given moment, they want to check if the infrastructure they deployed is aligned with best practices. And if not, they want to have the ability to easily fix any misconfigurations without rebuilding. That's, I think, the key for what we said, not waiting for the cost to get too high and not waiting for customers to complain, but rather be proactive when it comes to that, monitoring, understanding what's wrong, and easily fixing it. So we'll show a quick demonstration of how this can be done with FSx for ONTAP and Workload Factory. So again, this screen that we've seen up till now. In this case, we're going to go to the storage after it's been deployed already and up and running. Now, the main screen that you get here when you go to the dashboard of storage is not just for one system, but for all of the systems. You can choose across AWS accounts and across regions. So you get a bird's eye view of how well architected the systems are. And as you can see here, there is, it says 71%. So that's like the score for this system, where what you would see here is different areas: reliability, operational excellence, cost optimization, the score for each one of them. This doesn't really mean much on its own, but it does give you an indication where there are areas that you have to improve. And then there are different tabs, different sections within this dashboard that show you, for example, this is the protection coverage, how much of the systems are protected with remote replication, snapshots, ransomware protection, and backups, all of the things that are built into FSx for ONTAP. Then if I click on the investigate and I choose the specific system I want to look at now, I can go to a more detailed explanation of this. So here I would have in the different areas for reliability, for operational excellence, I would have certain configurations that are recommended. If there is this warning triangle, it means it's not optimized. I can see that. And then if I want to know what it is, I click on view and fix, and I get a detailed explanation of what it is that's wrong. And here, this is, for example, in this case, it's one of the volumes doesn't have automatic, or one of the systems doesn't have automatic capacity management. Now, automatic capacity management means that you configure a certain amount of capacity for the performance tier. That's for the the data that's going to be high performance. If it exceeds that, then you're going to get either performance problems, or there'll be problems with filling up the data. So you always want to have the option to expand when necessary, to flexibly adjust the capacity based on the behavior. So this is something that you can, it tells you, it gives a detail of how this would work, and a recommended configuration, which you can use or choose to do a different one. And then if you do continue, instead of going to the specific screens where you need to update that, it just does it for you. And then you can see it happening. You go to the tracker, you can see that this has been done. Now, if we go back to the specific, let's look at a specific FSX for ONTAP system here. We have a few of them, but we want to look into one of them. We will get the a menu called the well-architected status. So we can zoom into this and have a look at this system and see, okay, what is it that we need to change here? It's 86% well-architected, and we can see that there are some things, reliability and operational excellence, where we're not getting 100%. So again, we go down to the different options, and you can see that that here 2 of these are optimized, and actually 4 of these are 3 of these are optimized, 1 is not, and the one that's not is around reliability, which is the remote data replication. If you remember before, we replicated data from on-premises to AWS, so there's 2 copies of that data. We're good with that, because if either one of these copies, something happens, we've got a backup in the other place. But the new volume that we created for the finance department, we just created it. We didn't actually replicate that anywhere. So once they start putting data on there, it's at risk of, if there's a major outage or a disaster, then it won't have a copy. So what it says here is that this is something that needs to be fixed. We go to the finance volume here, and if we click on fix, it says it recommends setting up, Workload Factory recommends setting up a replication relationship for your data volume. And then it says what will happen when you do this. It will create a replication. You can do that in a different region, and it gives you all of the information that you need. And then if you click on continue, it will go to the specific replication screen. This is the same screen we saw before for replicating data from on-premises to AWS. And like I said, it's also used for replicating data from one region in AWS to a different region. And this really gives the highest level of protection, because if an entire region is affected by some sort of major disaster, there's another copy elsewhere in a different region. So again, this is the same replication wizard, where you have the option to do the replication through the wizard or through infrastructure as code. So we're getting towards the end. So I just want to summarize the operations section. So we've got, on the one hand, we got FSX for ONTAP with building blocks for performance and capacity scalability. So the ability to adapt the performance and the capacity based on what's happening in the real world, where data is growing, data is changing. And then you've got data protection capabilities, which are available on FSX for ONTAP, but if you haven't configured them, then you won't be necessarily getting the necessary protection. And that's where the well-architected orchestration comes in with Workload Factory, which looks at the entire estate of systems. That could be multiple systems across different regions in the world, analyzing them and seeing which ones are well architected and which ones have certain configurations that can be changed or that should be changed in order to achieve the 100% score. And you don't have to have everything at 100%. That's the company's decision. But this is really something that gives you an indication of where the areas that are recommended to improve are. And it really helps pinpoint the issues that need to be addressed very, very quickly, with a very detailed explanation of what it is that's recommended, why it's recommended, and what will happen if you click the fix button. So these things together, again, it's applying the different data protection capabilities, which are very varied. They're varied. There are the local snapshots, which are on the system itself. There's backup, which you can then restore later. And then there's the disaster recovery. These are 3 different practices that are recommended, and each of these are monitored separately. So again, we saw how you can find out if there's something wrong with the system and fix it. So this way you're proactively preventing the situation where the costs will suddenly get high or that users will start complaining. So with this, we can sort of summarize the session that we saw here. We've got I spoke about the well-architected framework for well-architected workloads on AWS, and we spoke about the building blocks. In this case, we took FSX for ONTAP as an example of a service that has the building blocks for well-architected infrastructure, and Workload Factory as the service that provides well-architected orchestration. In other words, taking these building blocks and applying them in a way that is perfect for your specific needs, for the use case, and for the company's requirements. And that includes the three different stages: the planning stage, setting everything up, doing that as fast as possible, and then provisioning, making sure that the provisioning is done with all of the correct configurations, and then the operation stage in which you want to have observability. You want to know what's going on, find where there are problems, and have the ability to quickly fix any of these. So I won't go over all of the features, but really these are the things that we saw here. And I think that time-wise, we need to move on to finalize this session. So this is the stage where we are inviting you to ask any questions that you may have before we conclude this. So Danny, John, does anybody see any questions on the Q&A that we didn't address?
Yes, I do. I'm just answering one right now. For example, can we monitor top usage or instance spikes in AWS FSx ONTAP Workload Factory? So first of all, that should be a metric in CloudWatch, I believe. And I know that in the roadmap there are monitoring tools and observability tools coming in Workload Factory. Don't know exactly when, but I did heard whispers it's on the roadmap. So let's hope for that. Well, a similar question about what else? Yes, about SVMDR, SnapMirror for SVMDR. So currently, the SnapMirror supported in FSx for ONTAP does retain permission. When it comes to SVMDR, I also believe this is once again it's. As we all know, FSx for ONTAP is a AWS tool, so they control the roadmap. So I do believe it's on the roadmap once again. I'm not privy to that, so I can only.
It is expected to come. I don't have the exact dates of the release yet, but it's definitely being.
I know they're working on
the
it.
advanced stages.
You're not the only one who's asking for this feature. You can be sure of that. And another question I saw also about upgrades. FSx for ONTAP is a managed service, unlike Cloud Volumes ONTAP, for example, which isn't a managed service. That means that AWS and AWS alone control the version. They roll out the version. The control that we do have, or you, the one who's provisioning it, is that you can set the maintenance window. So I would highly recommend that you set it in the least disruptive time.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions, or should we move on to
I think that's about it, unless maybe JD answered a question that there was a question here, a little bit of inside baseball. One of the somebody asked about the difference between NetApp BlueXP console and Workload Factory. So they are somewhat different. First of all, Workload Factory is currently not part of the not fully integrated in NetApp BlueXP console. However, if you have deployed connectors, you can use them for Workload Factory to discover FSx for ONTAP. Currently, the services are separate, but they share accounts, and you can use connectors. So, for example, if you have BlueXP, you can use Workload Factory with your BlueXP connectors. Workload Factory, however, does not require connectors. It uses Lambda functions instead, which gives the same function, but you don't need to maintain a VM. So that's, I think, a slight improvement and a slight difference and somewhat of an improvement. And one thing they do share for sure is the price. They're both free.
Yeah, so again, they can be, you can access Workload Factory through BlueXP, or you can access it directly. And we're going to give you in a moment, we're going to give you a link that you can actually get started with it right now. So yeah, so I'd like to thank everybody that took part here, because I think we had a very interesting session and great questions, and really everyone who took part here, thank you for the feedback that you gave us in the polls. Because this really helps us understand the current situation in the field. So we have resources here, and I think that Liat, if it's possible, we could share these in the chat so that you can use this. We got demo videos of all the different capabilities that you get with FSx for ONTAP shown through Workload Factory, so that you can see how these features are orchestrated. We've got a lot of blogs here that you can read more about the advanced features and links to the documentation of FSx for ONTAP and Workload Factory. So this is a QR code. You can use your mobile phone to get the link for Workload Factory, but this will also be shared in the chat, the link for Workload Factory. So going into the console, you can create a free account, and you can play around with it even without giving it any access to any systems. As we saw, the Explore Savings shows you planning tools. There are other things that you can play around with, but if you need to start deploying things, then you add your credentials, and you need to create this link, the Lambda function that Danny mentioned. All of this information is available in the documentation. So just making sure that everything is being shared. The information is in the chat.
Yeah, see, Liat sent everything.
Perfect. So thanks again for joining us in this session, and we're looking forward to seeing you again in future sessions. So it really was a pleasure, and take care, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Robert, for making such an interesting session. Thank you, Liat, for handling the chat, for handling the polls. Thank you very much, John, for answering questions for the audience. And thank everybody. Thank you all the attendees for asking insightful questions, for answering the polls, and for making this session interactive, interesting, and engaging. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.